VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider. One of the things that continues to happen is that when legislative proposals come that are destructive to the family, they may fail the first time, but those who seek to advance their causes continue to bring back those issues in order to try and wear down or to break down the forces that are seeking to keep the line in the sand, to make sure that we keep our freedoms, our sovereignty here as a nation. Such is the case now where we are finding that the UN Disabilities Treaty, known as the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is resurfacing once again. We're going to be dealing with that issue today. It's our privilege to have with us Michael Farris, who is the chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and chancellor of Patrick Henry College. He's a constitutional appellate litigator who has served as lead counsel in the United States Supreme Court, 8 federal circuit courts, and the appellate courts of 13 states. He's been a leader on Capitol Hill for over 30 years, widely known for his leadership on homeschooling. His organization puts out Homeschool Heartbeat, which is heard daily here on the VCY America Network. Michael, nice to have you back with us on Crosstalk.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you.
Just before we talk about this UN treaty that's resurfacing, Michael, if you would bring us up to date on the Romeike family, this family who fled Germany, seeking asylum here in the United States due to oppression over their sincerely held conviction to homeschool their children. We understand Eric Holder's Justice Department has filed action to get rid of this family, not grant asylum. Tell us exactly where things stand.
Well, yesterday we filed, in fact, late yesterday, we filed the appeal to the entire Sixth Circuit. The sequence of events leading up to that are that in 2008, the family arrived here and immediately properly filed asylum. They didn't wait to be arrested or anything. They properly filed asylum up front, asylum request up front. The first immigration judge that heard the case granted them asylum and held that Germany was engaged in religious persecution of homeschooling families. And the Obama administration appealed that decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. We appealed their success at round 2 to round 3, which is before a 3-judge panel of the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. And 15 days ago, the Sixth Circuit ruled in favor of the Obama administration's view and held that Germany's ban of homeschooling was perfectly appropriate and there was no basis for a grant of asylum. We have filed an appeal of that to the entire 15 judges on the Sixth Circuit, and now that's a very rarely granted alternative. It has to be a really important case. It has to be really clear reasons for granting it. Now, we think that that's true here. I mean, just to explain how clear I think it is that they made an error, is that in asylum cases, the number one issue is always the motive of the government, is why are they doing whatever they're doing against the persecuted person. And in our case, the German Supreme Court has told us exactly why they ban homeschooling. The Court of Appeals has said not only why they're banning homeschooling, but has described in detail the draconian action they take against families. Come into the home, search the home, look for the children, remove permanent custody, all these things that they describe that they do against homeschoolers. And then there's a letter from the German ministers of education that described the similar motives and similar actions. Despite we had all that evidence and repeatedly talked to them about it in the oral argument, I mentioned this stuff repeatedly, they never, ever acknowledge any of those pieces of evidence. They don't discuss them. They don't mention them. They by their silence, deny the existence of it, even though the motive of the government is the number one issue. And so we've asked the entire Sixth Circuit to look at the motive of Germany and to look at the evidence in the record and to correct the error made by the three-judge panel. If that works and they grant our rehearing, then we basically have a new trial in front of the same full 15 judges. And if that doesn't work, we're off to the U.S. Supreme Court, which again is not granted on a regular basis.
A number of members of Congress last week sent a letter urging the Attorney General to grant asylum. Is there anything our listeners can do, Michael?
Well, they can certainly pray. I mean, and I don't want to just say that in a kind of a perfunctory way at all. It's simply not perfunctory in any stretch. In fact, I asked people on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, to pray for me as I was writing the brief, and I rewrote the brief 4 times. I mean, not just a little rewrite. I rewrote the brief 4 times because I just had really clear, good ideas coming to me as I was going along. So I'm convinced that my prayer request was being answered, and I'm very happy with the final product. I think it was the best product that we could have done, within this time frame. And I know that God's people's prayers were a part of the reason for the ability to distill better versions of the argument. And so, I'd really ask them to pray and pray for the 15 judges that they would do the right thing. I think that they can call their members of Congress and say, and I'm sure we have on our website the letter, so you can see which members have signed the letter. And if their member of Congress has not signed the letter, they could call them and say, why not? Well, can you sign the letter? Can you send another letter like it saying that you agree with this? And that'd be something, because ultimately there's a possibility that we're going to have to go for a political solution to Congress, to get Congress to change the asylum law to make sure that families, not just the Romica family, but other families like them, would have the freedom to come here. We could, call it the Plymouth Rock Bill, because basically the Obama administration's position would have sent the people back home from Plymouth Rock. So, no, I'm sorry, I know you're concerned about your children. I know that's why you're coming here, because you fled England because of religious freedom problems, and you fled Holland because of concerns for your children. But we don't allow people who are concerned for their children and concerned for religious freedom in this country anymore. Mm. So, we may have to go to legislation on this. And if that's the case, then the fact that people have already been hearing from their members, from their constituents for months about this issue would be an important thing. So I think right now is the time to call your member of Congress and say, have you signed the letter for the Romica family to stay in the United States? If not, why not? And by the way, folks, the number to Congress is 202-225-3121, 202-225-3121. Michael Farris is with us today from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and there is, you've been with us previously talking about this UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD. Last year, just a huge concerted effort to ratify this through the Senate, but it failed, and it's now again rearing its head. What group is behind the resurfacing of the treaty at this time? Well, it's the administration is pushing the treaty. So the Obama administration, Senator John Kerry is now Secretary of State John Kerry. He was my chief debate opponent, if you will, when they had the hearings in the Senate last July, and I was testifying before Senator Kerry's committee, now Secretary of State's committee. So Kerry's pushing it. There's a group of internationalists that lobby Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. And the disability community has been, frankly, they've been lied to by the internationalists who've convinced them that Americans with disabilities would be better off if this treaty is ratified, which is preposterous. If the arguments that were being made by the people who are promoting this treaty were plausibly true, then, okay, there's a little bit of merit to it. but they're just outright lies.
Let's look at the treaty, because from the outset we look at the title, UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and right away we say, well, certainly people with disabilities ought to have rights, but there is so much in this treaty that just causes some grave concern. So just school us again, if you would, Michael, on what this Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is. What is this treaty? What kind of impact would it have upon us?
Well, the most important words in the title of the treaty are UN Convention on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got to focus on that. Why do we need a UN treaty to set the public policy on people with disabilities? That's the fundamental question right there. The United States, I believe, should set its own domestic policy on all. In fact, I think it should set its own foreign policy. There is a place for treaties in this world. I have an LLM, which is an advanced law degree from the University of London in public international law. There is a place for international law, but it's how nations treat other nations. I don't believe it's a legitimate function of international law at all to have a UN treaty tell the United States, or for that matter any other country, how it should run its own domestic affairs. American self-government means we elect the leaders who make our law, period. And we can't elect these 18 members of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the Rights of the Child, or the CEDAW Committee, or any of these other UN human rights treaties. We don't elect those people. At most, we would have one American on the treaty, and they don't even represent the government. They represent themselves. If there is an American, the people serve in their individual capacity, not as a representative of any government. And so, this is not the way to make public policy in this country. So if we want to have laws on public policy that deal with disabilities, sure we do. To me, it should be basically state law. There is a place for some federal law on this, perhaps, but there is no place in my value system, because I believe in American self-government, for international law telling the United States how we should run ourselves.
As a little side note to this, isn't the United States really at the forefront of protecting those with disabilities around the world?
There's no doubt of that. That's the testimony, and that's the position of everybody on this treaty. The people that are for it, the people that are against it, that's the one fact we all agree with. The United States is the number one nation in the world on treating people with disabilities well. And how did we get there? We got there because we had good domestic policy, and we have good-hearted people in this country who want to do the right thing. We didn't have to have, it's not like reluctant compliance. You compare the compliance of Americans concerning the Americans with Disabilities Act and the other related acts, compare compliance spirit on that with speed limits. People don't obey the speed limits all that well, but we obey the disabilities law in this country with enthusiasm. People embrace it. We agree it's a good thing to treat people well with disabilities. So our country's spirit plus our laws, which have nothing to do with international law, have created the best thing in the world. So what we should be promoting around the world are promotion of those two things. We should be encouraging other people to adopt the right kind of spirit, and but all you can do there is encourage it. You can't require people to do that. You can't pass a law to do that. But you can also say, you need to have good domestic laws, and you can do that with suggestions to people. But treaties aren't suggestions; they're binding UN-governed laws.
Michael Farris, our guest here today on Crosstalk. We're going to take a quick 60-second break, and we're going to come back and delve more into this UN treaty, and we're going to talk about the move that's going on within the U.S. Senate at this point to ratify it. We'll be back in just 1 minute.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, when did the dinosaurs finally die?
Chris, the dinosaurs, according to the Bible, must have died after Adam sinned. At the beginning, all things were very good. There was no sin, there was no death. But Adam's sin changed everything. In Genesis chapter 3, we see that sin ruined God's very good creation, and now everything suffers the wages of sin. Everything dies. Of course, this death problem is solved only by the death of Jesus Christ on the cross. If death was here before Adam, if the dinosaurs died before Adam, then death is not the penalty for sin because it was here before sin. And if death is not the penalty for sin, then why did Christ have to die? You see how even the doctrine of salvation through Jesus Christ goes back to Genesis for its foundation.
To find out more about creation science, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network. Our guest today is Michael Farris, chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and chancellor at Patrick Henry College. You can find out more on their organization at hslda.org. We're talking today here about the UN Disabilities Treaty. It is known as a UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the CRPD. It is resurfacing once again in the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. And as we talk about this treaty, Michael, how is the word disability defined in this treaty?
It's not, and that's one of the problems. They say that disability is an evolving concept. So what's disability today may not be disability tomorrow. And that could be for good or for bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, it could be, it's most likely to be expanded so that things that are not considered disabilities today would be considered disabilities in the future, and we might end up with all kinds of duties to pass laws for people that have some condition that we don't know anything about right now, or we consider it so minor that it wouldn't justify a great legal regime to supervise it in everybody's life. But we don't know, and that's one of the basic principles of all treaties. So when I got my LLM in public international law in the University of London just 3 or 4 years ago, I studied the law of treaties, and one of the core principles of treaties is that treaties are living documents, meaning they don't mean the same thing 5 years after you ratify them as they mean the day you sign up for them. And I don't think we ought to sign up for any treaties on that basis. I don't care, even if they are, a legitimate treaty like a law of war. To me, law of war is a legitimate treaty. But if I was the president or the secretary of state or the lawyer advising any of them, I would say we don't sign any treaty that doesn't have an explicit provision in it that says we don't buy into this living treaty nonsense. The treaty says what we're agreeing to, and we don't agree to anything that is going to change over time. And so the whole treaty can change over time, but even the definitions, and anybody that's ever done any kind of debate or legal analysis of any kind know that the definition sections of any proposition are absolutely crucial. If who can control the definitions controls the substance of the law, and that's incredibly dangerous.
And so, I mean, it's another one of those issues, the Nancy Pelosianism out there that let's pass it, then we can find out what's in it. In other words, we'll define it after it's passed and as we go through life here. Right.
Yeah. It's basically license for these people to tell us what our law is going to be, and they can change their mind along as we go along.
Now, some have argued that, well, since the United States is at the forefront, this will give us a seat at the table of the world so that we can help them also bring about special protections for those with disabilities. How do you respond to that?
We can do that without being a party to this treaty. The seat at the table is usually in reference to being one of the 18 members of this board. We need to keep in mind that the committee, they're called the committee rather than a board is the correct terminology. The committee has 18 members. They serve in their individual capacity. They don't represent the American government. So the American government itself gets no seat at the table at all. All we can do is vote on who those 18 people are. And there's a complicated political process that goes on. People spend money, they campaign. There's a lot of vote trading going on between various nation groups and blocks, and there's informal quota systems that you've got to have so many from this continent and so many from that continent and all this other stuff. The United States, as a government, does not acquire any seat at the table on the official body of the committee, and we can informally be a part of it right now. Everybody understands that we lead the world in this, and we can't let the UN construct this massive organization and say, well, in order to have a seat in the world government, we've got to participate in the world government. Well, that assumes that the world government is a good way to govern. And I don't believe it's a good way to govern. And, anybody that doesn't think that we already have a world government doesn't know what's going on. We do. But it's like the Articles of Confederation period during the United States. It's a very early stage of a world government. We've got the International Court of Justice. We've got the UN. We've got a legislative branch. We've got a judicial branch. There's even the UN proposition for military. When our soldiers fight for the UN, they have to take pledges that they will obey the directions of the UN Secretary General, not the President of the United States, not our Commander in Chief. I litigated a case like that before the federal courts for Michael New years ago. And so there's already a world government in place. It's just not very effective. And we reject it a lot. But that's what we're saying is we should participate in this growing move to have a world government. And it's crazy. I thought we believed in American self-government, not world government. But that's really the choice. On issue after issue, they're trying to get us to join along in saying, well, let's let the UN help us with this one. Let's let the UN help us with that one. And we're not announcing to everyone what we're doing little bit by little bit, but the net result is we're giving in over more and more of our governmental decision-making power to the United Nations on an almost daily basis, and we can't do that.
In a paper you put out last September, Michael, you also talked about a reservation regarding the private conduct. What do you mean by that?
Well, the way the treaty is written is it says that no one can violate any person's rights, any disabled person's rights under the treaty. Okay, so it literally says it that point blank, and what it means is, I as an individual, or you as an individual, or anybody else in this country, if we sign this treaty, our legal duty, the way the treaty is written itself, is that we can never deny any person their rights under the treaty. So, what's one of the rights under the treaty? Access to buildings. What buildings? All buildings. Does that include my home? Yeah. All buildings is all buildings. It doesn't say all public buildings or all government-owned buildings or all buildings where there's at least 5 employees or, anything. It's just all buildings. So if a person who's a door-to-door salesman approaches my house and he's in a wheelchair and I don't have wheelchair access for him, I have literally denied his rights under the treaty if we're going to take it the way it's really written. Now, the administration itself realized that part of the treaty is a problem. They can't really mean it that way. And so the administration proposed a reservation to say, well, we don't really mean that. Well, unfortunately, they didn't write it very well. And so even though they recognized there was a problem here, the reservation that they proposed had giant loopholes in it. And we contended that the ultimate result is that we have an unreliable guide, and it's very likely that private homeowners are going to be able to be, held to be in violation of this treaty if we don't make every home and every building, every church, every camp, every structure, everything to be compliant with the ADA. We have some common sense rules now about that. We figured out there's kind of a public, place where the public is generally accessible, and then the rest of the world we say you're on your own. Do what you think is available and is economically feasible for you. But we don't force every person in every home to make their house wheelchair compliant and so on. We just don't do that. But that's what would happen under the literal writing of the treaty. And the other thing is, reservations, even if they're adopted, they can get removed later on. And so even if we adopt it with a reservation about this incredibly dangerous rule, there can be 2 problems. One, it can be written poorly, and which has happened last time. And 2, it could be repealed in the future. So we're right back to what the treaty actually says.
I'd like to hit a couple other issues of this treaty, one of which is disturbing to so many as well, and that is dealing with abortion funding.
There are 2 provisions in the treaty relative to abortion funding, Article 23 and Article 25. Article 25 simply says that whatever abortion funding we give to everyone, we have to also extend to disabled people. So that's problematic, but it's not as problematic as Article 23. Article 23 says we have a duty to give abortion funding to disabled people. So even if the state of Oklahoma, let's say, doesn't want to fund abortion services for anybody, this treaty would require Oklahoma to give abortion funding to disabled people, because under the Constitution of the United States, or in the Supremacy Clause, anything in a state law that's inconsistent with any treaty, the treaty trumps it. And so Article 23 of this treaty would trump Oklahoma state law or Mississippi state law or any other state that has the good sense to not do abortion funding.
What about Senator Rockefeller? I think he said that this does not create any new abortion rights, that abortion law in the U.S. will be unchanged. I think he wrote some kind of paper on that.
I did. The simple answer is Senator Rockefeller only talked about Article 25. And, he's partly right, or, let's just concede Article 25 to him. And he's not exactly right, but he's close. But he ignores entirely Article 23. Article 23 is a distinct provision, and that's the problematic one. The 23 is much more broad than 25. So anything that 23 accomplishes, 25 is just a subset of it. So it's no big deal. 23 is the big deal, and that changes American law. And Rockefeller, like a lot of the other people, they just buy the propaganda of the other side, and they just, like is often the case, when people just tell you part of the story, it sounds so good. And if you only talk about Article 23 or Article 25, well, you can make it sound like it's not a big deal. But Article 23 is a much bigger story, and every state in the country that refuses to fund abortions would be forced to fund abortions under this treaty for disabled people.
And I'd like to hit another key area that just really rang alarm bells, and that's the words best interest of the child.
Yeah. The best interest of the child standard is a 400-year-old term of art. It means the government can decide what's best for the child, not the parent. That's what the standard means. And so we have a 400-year-old tradition because we have a rule about when the government can exercise that power. And the answer is it can exercise that power after the parents have been proven to have abused or neglected or abandoned the child. So basically, when there's proof of a breach of the parent-child relationship in one of those ways, then and only then can the government decide what it thinks is best for the child, because it's a subjective decision in every circumstance. What's best for the child? Well, this is good. This is better. This is best. And so, where should my child go to school? What should be the discipline policy? What medical care should they have? All kinds of decision that could be in the category of one person's good, better, and best, and other people could say, well, it's good, better, and best. And you have arguments about what's best. Well, the treaty says in every case, the best interest of the child shall be the paramount consideration, which means the government gets the paramount decision-making authority in every case. So, in other words, parents who have disabled children will be in the same exact legal posture as parents who have been proven to have abused or neglected their child. There's nothing wrong with the best interest standard if it's applied in the right cases. And the right cases is when the evidence has been proven that the parents are abusers. And until then, every parent should get to decide for their child what they want to do and what they think is best.
We're speaking with Michael Farris today from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Could I encourage you folks to get handy a sheet of paper, a pen, or a pencil, and we're going to be giving you some contact information where you can let your voice be heard on this matter. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
Often, when it's time to pay the bills, we murmur at having to lay out money for a number of expenses. In other cases, spending becomes impulsive to buy now, rather than evaluate if the expense is necessary. It's often a time when the focus is on the temporal rather than the eternal. VCY America has a way for you to direct your thoughts heavenward. We are offering a two-tone, brown, heavy vinyl checkbook cover with a scripture verse from Philippians 4:13 embossed in silver type. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. It's a constant reminder that we all belong to Christ and that He is the one who enables us. It's also a reminder that our stewardship is to honor Him. VCY is making available this checkbook cover with a scripture text for a donation of $7. Just call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829. Or write VCY at 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208.
Well, folks, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has resurfaced once again, and there are pledges for hearings to go forth on this. We're speaking today with Michael Farris from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and I understand, Michael, that this treaty would actually obligate the United States to fund disability programs in nations that can't afford them. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, unfortunately it is. One of the duties under the treaty is called international cooperation and development. And if you just hear that, on its face, it doesn't mean that much to us. That sounds like good. It's kind of like the necessary and proper clause in the U.S. Constitution. We've come to learn that the necessary and proper clause in the U.S. Constitution means that Congress thinks it can spend money on any fool project it wants. Well, international development and cooperation is the same kind of a thing. It is a legal term of art in international law, and it means countries that have access to substantial resources have a duty to fund programs under the treaty regime for countries that can't afford it. That's what it means. It means sharing of resources, sharing of wealth. It is a wealth generating, actually a mandatory wealth sharing approach, and that's what that language means. It's if I hadn't taken these classes in international law from the University of London, I don't know that I would have gotten it. I would just said, I would have the common ordinary sense. Well, yeah, okay, we want to cooperate with people. We want to, do this other stuff. That's not what it means. It means you got to fund this stuff, and it is now. Can somebody sue us if we don't? No. Can somebody invade us? Well, if they can invade us if they want to try. But I don't argue the thing on the basis of can they actually successfully force us to obey the law. My contention about this treaty is we should read it and see what it says, and whatever it says that we need to do, if we're going to give our promise that we're going to do this, we ought to do it. And if it says we have a duty to fund these programs in other nations, then we need to breathe deeply and say the only way we're going to sign this treaty and be a part of it and ratify the treaty is if we really intend to do what the treaty says, including all of our obligations, including funding these other nations. So if we're not going to really keep our promises, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
I think that what we ought to lead the world on relative to treaties is this. If we make a promise, we ought to keep it. We ought to show the whole world that treaties are not something that you can keep when you want to. And that's what the advocates of this treaty are saying. Well, yeah, that problem, that goes a little far. We don't really want to do that part. We don't want to do this part. We don't want to do that. Well, they're advocating piecemeal compliance, and that's not good for international law. That's not good for the world community. What's good for the world community is people keeping their promises. And so I don't believe in making promises we're not going to keep.
Do you believe that if this treaty is ratified by our Senate, that it's going to be a gateway for other UN treaties to also pass?
There is absolutely no doubt of that. This is the warm-up act for the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for the Convention of the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Just pause it. I would invite everybody to go onto the Internet and just Google CEDAW, C-E-D-A-W, Convention on All Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and just read the preamble. So if you want to know what that treaty says, just read its preamble. It talks about a complete reordering of the economic system of the world. It talks about universal and mandatory disarmament, and that means disarming nations and disarming private individuals. It talks about reordering the family structure. So those are just three of its goals. Reordering the world's economic system, disarming all nations, reordering all families. That's a pretty grand goal for something called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with, or the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. it's hard to see the connection. But these internationalists know no bounds. I have a friend who used to be a president of a college out in Washington State that says the goal of every committee is to rule the world. Well, these people are trying. Yeah. They are doing their level best to make this into a one-world, international, socialist, anti-Christian, anti-moral regime, and they're using the people in the United States Senate who haven't got the sense to really read and understand treaties to do their dirty work for them. And we are the prize. If we don't join these regimes, they don't really work. But the real prize is they think that they can turn America into a European socialist state. And that's what all of this is really about. And that's the goal. And if you can't pass American laws fast enough to do it, I mean, we're passing those kind of silly laws on a regular basis. But if we can't do it fast enough by American laws, let's get some treaties to help push us along toward that socialist, anti-moral goal. And, it's not a pretty picture. I mean, in the German homeschool case that we started off with is an example. Germany says, and their Supreme Court says, it is okay to use the law to coerce religious and philosophical minorities to think like the government wants them to think. That's what they say out loud. And we aspire to join that kind of a community. I don't want it. I don't want their socialism. I don't want their lack of freedom. I don't want their coercion. I don't want their hatred of Christianity. But this is not some conspiracy theory. We don't need to go read some secret protocols. Go read the actual UN documents and just look at them. And if people just look at the documents, it's right there for anybody to see.
And they can access them through your website?
They can access them through our website, or they can just go and Google. And, just read the CEDAW Convention's preamble. It'll scare anybody to death that has a lick of common sense and believes in freedom one whit.
And folks, that's CEDAW, the CEDAW Treaty. That's the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We're talking also today about the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's also linked, the common language, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. As it relates to this disability treaty, how imminent is this in the U.S. Senate?
Well, we originally were told by one of the Senate staffers that it was going to be, the first hearing was going to be on June 4th. I met with the lead Republican staffer on the Foreign Relations Committee last week, and he said that wasn't a firm date, and they're being told by the Democrats who control this and who are obviously not telling us the details of their plans, that it's probably going to be a little later in June. They're trying their best. Their current goal is to try to pass the treaty by the end of July. So this is going to go fast. And so, if it's not June 4th, it's going to be, sometime really pretty soon. And so they're going to try to get this done by the end of July. Mm-hmm. Now, that was their goal last year, too.
Right.
And they didn't make it because the American public rose up and said, no, we don't want the UN telling us how we should make our public policy on this subject. There's really two really short reasons that we should do that. If we believe in American self-government, that is, Americans should make our own policy decisions on treaties, on disability law, then you should be opposed to it. And if you believe that families with disabled children, that parents should get to make their own decisions and not government, if you believe in those two forms of self-government, American self-government and family self-government, then you need to be opposed to this treaty. And so we need to call senators right now and say, please oppose the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Don't buy into the lies of the other side. Let's make American law for this. In fact, I met with a major disability group in the last week, and they said, because of reasons of confidentiality, we had a off-the-record kind of meeting. They pointed out two things to me, though. One is that they disagree with the administration when they argue it won't change American law. They said it does change American law. And secondly, they also said that there were some provisions in the treaty that they liked. And I said, well, what are those? And they showed them to me. And I said, okay, I can see your arguments on those. On two of them, for sure, I can see your arguments on those. But why don't we just go pass an American law on that? I'll help you. because they were right about, one of them was they wanted to make sure that disabled parents don't have their children removed from them by the government just because they're disabled. And I agree with them, 100%. I agree. I said, well, let's go change the law. I'll help you. Lead the charge. So anything that's good in this treaty, and, like anything that's of this nature, it's not going to be every idea in it, it's bad. That's just not the way it is. But it's not whether the ideas are good or bad. The question is, who should make our law? And if there's a good idea in it, well, let's go pass an American law and cherry pick those 2 or 3 areas where we can improve American law. So rather than doing that, rather than picking areas where we could actually improve American law, and the Senate Democrats have decided what we're going to do is spend our time trying to force us to abide by this UN treaty regime, rather than doing what we could do to fix those areas where people with disabilities advocacy groups could show us where we could make some improvements, including protecting the rights of disabled parents.
Folks,
which I think we should do that.
I'd like to give you some phone numbers, folks, because there's a point of contact. The treaties are ratified through the United States Senate. It takes a 2/3 vote by the Senate, and you can rest assured that those who vote against this are going to be branded as people who are against those with disabilities. And it behooves each individual to contact your 2 U.S. senators. Now, if you have access to the internet, the best way is those personal phone calls to their offices, which you can access at senate.gov. Senate.gov, and you can click on senators. You can find who your 2 U.S. senators are. If you need a single number to get you into the Senate switchboard, you can do so at 202-224-3121. Just tell them what state you're from, and they'll connect you to one of your senators. They'll tell you who your 2 senators are if you don't have that information. That Senate switchboard is 202-224-3121. This is something that's going to go before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. The majority party has a phone number there. The minority party has a phone number there. The majority party phone number for the Committee on Foreign Relations, their number is 202-224-4651. That's 202-224-4651. The minority party is the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate. Their number is 202-224-6797. That's 224-6797. But folks, there's fluidity to this at this point. At first, it looked like June 4th, next week, this was going to be coming up. The date is going to be fluid. There's not going to be a whole lot of notice in advance, but the goal that the proponents of this have is to see this passed before their August recess. That's why you're getting early notice here through this program to know what it is that's taking place and how you can be informed and how you can let your voice be heard. And another key component, folks, is to tell others. Share with others the information. Click on hslda.org. You'll find a link to this Disabilities Treaty and information and articles and rationale and arguments pertaining to this treaty. Share that information. Share a link to this program with others that they can become informed as to what this treaty is all about. Well, folks, we don't have much time, but I'd like to open our phone lines for the final segment here. Our telephone number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829. Maybe there's something that's kind of muddied the waters in your mind about this treaty. You need more information. I have a question regarding it, a comment pertaining to it. Our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. But, Michael, I'm convinced that this is a time in which people throughout the nation need to let their voices be heard on the matter.
Well, absolutely. And the only way we're going to defeat this treaty is if people are willing to stand with us on this issue. In addition to the HSLDA website, if people aren't homeschoolers and want similar information in a more broad context, we have another website, parentalrights.org, and they can go there and they can sign up for the email list there. And come, and we'll keep them updated on, votes are coming, hearings are coming, and all of that through that as well.
parentalrights.org. We're going to take a quick 60-second break and come back to your calls. Our number is 800-733-9829. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. We're continuing our series on a biblical worldview and money. We're on point number 14. A righteous man saves or conserves wealth to provide for one's family, to be a blessing to others, and to further the gospel. We see this represented in Proverbs 21, verse 20, Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 11. Yes, indeed, a righteous man saves. He conserves. He takes inventory of his resources. He plans. And we do this for many reasons. Biblically, we have to provide for our family. We saw that in our last commentary from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. But we also not only are to provide for our family spiritually and materially, but we're to be a blessing to others, making sure that no one inside the New Testament church is without. And we also use it to further the gospel. If you want to have a biblical worldview for money, you'll find more information on our website at worldviewweekend.com.
So often today, folks, the philosophy is that government knows best, and I certainly beg to differ with that. And, folks, this goes beyond our own government. We're talking about this international committee that's going to be determining what is in the best interest of the child. And there's some grave alarm bells that are ringing regarding this treaty, and there are many, many arguments in opposition to this. We've discussed just a few of those today in Crosstalk with Michael Farris, but we're going to get right to our phone lines here in the state of Illinois. Zoe, thanks for calling. You're on the air.
Hi, I have about 3 points, and they're quick, though. And I'm disabled, and they always put things in these treaties that are good so that they make people be for it. Mm-hmm. This stuff's been coming in, as you know, down the pike for it's all been planned, and it's just a building block toward controlling everything and everybody on the planet. And it's been as I say, it's been planned. I don't think it's like a lot of it's naivete. I think it's totally they want it. But the other thing that I think is that I don't know. It's so far along, I'm not sure how much we can do. But I do think that was an excellent point about being for the good parts that we can do in our own country.
So I'm going to have him. Thank you for the call,
Michael.
She said it may be so far along. What good can we do? Now this has been stopped before.
We won this last year. We need to win it again, and we need to keep winning. Now I'm actually working on a constitutional amendment to ban the use of treaties to control domestic policy of this country, and so there is a long-term solution that we can have to all this kind of nonsense. But in the meantime, we just have to stop this stuff, and we have stopped the Convention on the Rights of the Child for 20 years now. We've stopped this treaty once before. I believe that, I know we can stop it again. If the public will rise up, we will stop it again. And it's especially important for people with disabilities to speak up in the way that this charming lady has just done. And so I would encourage her to make sure that she has called her senators and says, I'm disabled. I oppose this treaty. I want, good policies here in this country, and quit wasting your time with these kind of nonsensical things, and let's fix any gaps that we've got now. Let's fix them.
To Muskegon, Michigan. Cora, you're on the air.
Yeah, the thing that I don't like is how can they always get these treaties, and then we got our senators in there that is for everything that comes down, and no matter how many times we call and tell them that, we don't want this stuff, do they really listen to us, or do they just bluff us off?
Well, to some degree, there's some of them they're not going to respond to the phone calls no matter what. And frankly, there is almost no chance that any Democrat's going to vote against this treaty. But they're going to listen to the administration and do what they're told. If every Republican would vote against the treaty, it'd be defeated. It would not go anywhere. And so really the battleground is for Republicans, and this is kind of like a backbone transplant for Republicans to make sure that they have the backbone to stand up against what they know is wrong. They're afraid. I mean, these people show up in wheelchairs and they have these stickers on that say vote for the treaties, and they get portrayed as being against disabled people if they vote against the treaty. It's a lie, and they just have to have the courage to stand up and say, look, I vote for American laws on this, and I think we can win, and I don't think we should give up.
Administration tells them to.
Thank you so much, Cora. Amy in Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Hi. Just like Mr. Schneider asked you, Mr. Farris, whether this treaty would pave the way for further treaties, I'm wanting to revisit the Romica issue again. And
sure.
As a former homeschool mom, I'm concerned that this would pave the way for possible persecution against homeschoolers in America.
Well, there's no doubt of it. I mean, it would lead to that for families with disabled children right now with this treaty. But if the Convention on the Rights of the Child passes, then we've got the German situation in place right here in America for everybody, for every child. And so that's their goal. And, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the goal. I just got an email while we've been on this program that President Obama is hosting a White House event for children who are here as a result of being illegal immigrant children. Now, we have room in our country for 11 million people who came here. Let's be really nice about it and say they came here for economic opportunity. If we've got room for those 11 million people and have White House celebrations for them, why doesn't this White House have room for one family that wants to be an American, who wants to live in the United States, so they can have religious freedom to homeschool their kids? And the only answer to that is a very dangerous one, is they don't believe in the freedom to homeschool. And the way the administration argued this case has dangerous implications for all American homeschoolers, and these treaties do as well.
Thank you, Amy. Let's go to Randy. Go ahead, Randy. You're on the air.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to say that all the treaties, that so-called treaties that we've had with the UN, are all bogus because they lack sovereignty. According to our Constitution, a nation has to have sovereignty, and the UN is just the world at large. It's a mob. And when they started the UN in 1945, and the charter, that we had the so-called treaty with them, it's bogus because they do not have sovereignty. They've never had sovereignty, never had an immigration policy or anything, and don't have borders because it's the world at large.
And what we do, Michael, actually we surrender our sovereignty to this body.
We do. I mean, in a very technical sense, the treaty is a treaty with all the different nations. And so if, like in the Convention of the Rights of the Child, there's 192 nations that are the party to the treaty. The UN is the convener that draws the 192 nations together, and the 192 nations make the treaty. So on a technical sense, they're treaties with other nations. But on a substantive sense, on kind of, you step back and look at it in real reality and ignore the technicalities for a second, it is 192 nations or 193 nations agreeing we're going to let this UN body have jurisdiction over it. So you're exactly right, Jim. It is nations agreeing to be governed by this international tribunal that sits in the Geneva offices of the United Nations. And I didn't think we signed up for that in the United States. We didn't want London ruling over us, and that's why we have the Declaration of Independence. Why we would need the Declaration of Dependence on the East River in New York and Geneva in the UN baffles me.
Folks, again, the number to your senators, 202-224-3121, 224-3121. Senate.gov is their website. You can also get more information at parentalrights.org, hslda.org. Michael Farris, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jim.
And folks, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk. Your senators need to hear from you on this important issue.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.